Thank you to be here today. We have William Easton here with us. He is the director of Futuregames Sweden. And William, if you want to start your presentation.
Absolutely. Just make sure that it all works. So I'm going to share now, and I hope you see my screen. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Yep, I'll start the PowerPoint. Yep. My name is William Easton. I'm the head of Futuregames, and I'm going to talk around for quite some time as a school, and then I'll go specifically into the issues of which relate to the Beyond Zoom stuff. But as a school, we exist in a bunch of different places in Sweden. And in Norway, and also in New Zealand, and we're opening up next autumn also in Warsaw, and we are currently in also negotiations for opening up in both in Copenhagen and also in Brno in the Czech Republic in the next couple of years. So we're a game school. We educate in a number of different areas in the gaming areas. So we cover game art, game design, game programming, quality assurance, project management, marketing, and then we also have branched into VR and AR and XR and MR kind of areas, and we're expanding also into animation and also into some of the other areas in the future. But so we've been around for a while. I'll give you a very quick overview. We've been around for about 25 years, and the school hasn't always been called Futuregames, but on and off, we've been around for about 25 years, making us one of the oldest game development schools in Europe. We work with about 300 or more game studios. We're a vocational education, meaning that we are operated under the government authority here in Sweden that builds educations which are part of the vocational higher educational stream. And that has requirements on us, different, say, from universities. For example, it means that 80% of our students need to find relevant employment 8 months or 6 months after they've graduated. So it's a very different kind of education than, say, university education. But at the same time, about 45% of our students have already had a university degree before they come to us. So we're kind of like a direct funnel directly into the industry. And we don't really have that many teachers. We have only about 8 teachers, but we employ, and the 400 is just for, it's probably closer to 900 teachers that we bring in every year from the industry who come and work with us. They will maybe be teaching only for one day, but almost all the teaching is done by the industry professionals. And that's both, that's also going to be relevant to the discussion about the Beyond Zoom thing as well. We run internships every single year, about 100 a year, with a 30-week-long internship direct placement into companies where the students, the majority of the students, I would say about 95%, get employed by the companies immediately after they've completed their internship. So it's the way in which the students find their role and also get employed afterwards. We publish about 40 games a year, either using, if you know the games world, we either use itch, which is really for sandbox games, and then we either use or Steam, which is we use for slightly larger kind of games. And that's been a really useful thing, because actually the students actually have to make a game that actually has a public process. It's actually presented publicly. We're not making hypothetical games. We make real games. And we have about 1,000 students currently on 4 locations. We're a partner with Epic Games, which means that we're an accredited institution through Epic, and we're also a Rookies certified school. If you don't know your way around the games industry, the games world, these are very important things. But I think this last number is the important one. About 40% of all the people who are employed in the Swedish games industry are our former students. So we have had a very important role in actually building the industries here in Sweden. And many of the leading companies in Sweden are directly our students. So the company Hazelight, which won Game of the Year this year. When they first started, they were only our students, and now they're not, but still a lot of our students work there. So we're a big player within the national arena, but we're also increasingly in the international arena. In terms of our kind of values, our mission is that we provide updated skills and tools to solve today's and tomorrow's challenges. We work almost entirely with the industry telling us what we need to do. I mean, basically, we have boards and connections with the industry all the time, and we don't, it's really the industry telling us what we should be included in the curriculum of what we're teaching. So we're not really, even though we are defining it, most of the input we have about how we develop is coming directly from the industry. So in terms of updating skills, we'll get a signal from companies saying they need more, this area needs more concentration and like that. So it's a very different kind of situation than perhaps university education. I myself have worked in both areas. So I've taught also in universities in Britain and in Poland and in Turkey and for many years in the United States. So I know my way around that world very well, but this is a very different kind of education. Our vision is we tend to think about the role of education across all the various things we do as being about contributing to sustainability and change. So I think that's a kind of like an attitude that we have that extends to everything that we're doing. This means that we spend a lot of time working with the sort of social impact of what we're doing and why we set up schools in certain places, why we're opening up in Nordreisa in northern Norway. This is a school, this is an area of Norway above the Arctic Circle. Traditionally, it only had like mining and whaling. That we are part of helping to build a new infrastructure in that area. The same thing in the north of Sweden, in Boden, Skellefteå, the same kind of things. And so that's very much part of the kind of DNA of who we are. And probably the thing that we push most in terms of our kind of like positioning internationally is that we aim to be the most diverse games education in the world, which means not just obviously gender, but also means about functional variation. It means about age and other kind of aspects of diversity. And we do a number of other projects. I'm working with Francesca on a couple of other projects which relate to this in other areas. And it's become a kind of touchstone for everything we do. We don't have a separate kind of diversity person. It's what we do with every day. So just to give you a kind of an indication of the way we think about this, we have a student, well, I can tell you two stories. We have, I have a student currently from Palestine. She was making games on the West Bank with only electricity 3 days a week. She brings something to the school I could not possibly teach. We have a number of students with functional variation. We have a student right now who has hearing impairment, and in games, being able to work with people who are deaf or have hearing impairment is part of making a game. I don't have to teach that to my students because they're making games with a student who has hearing impairment. So they're looking to create visual cues in the games so they can respond to a wider diversity of an audience. So that's really who we are, our values. And now I'm going to go into the topic, which is really about how we've dealt with the challenges of online and offline education. I think as a school, we probably found it easier than many of other schools. We didn't really have during COVID, we didn't really have a major issue to moving our education online because much of what we already were doing was already in that realm. We had some other issues which I'm going to go into, but in essence, I think that for a school like us, it was a much more straightforward process because this is actually something we always have to do. The games industry is and has been a kind of hybrid forum already. Many people work at distance already, so it's not something that was such a shock to our system, though we did learn a great deal, I think, from that. And I'm going to try and go through the things that I think that some of the positives, and then some of the more the challenges we received, and some of the ways we're thinking about approaching this in the future. In terms of the opportunities, one of the ones for us was clearly internationalization. We don't have any, the only reason we don't we have teachers from all over the world who deliver lectures to our students, as we're not held by the university restrictions on the kinds of people we can take in as teachers. We don't have to have certain kind of qualifications. They're more about skill sets. We have teachers from everywhere. We have, for example, right now we have a number of teachers based in Turkey who are accredited Unity instructors who are helping us teaching in some of our technical areas. And this also is true of some of our international students. So we have a number of students who study with us until they'll be able to get their residency permits to come to Sweden. They can study online comfortably until they actually get here. So it's increased our capacity for internationalization. We are multi-site, so we can run our educations running from any one of the sites where we're working. So we could have lecturers or classes based in one city, but actually broadcast to another. It's freed us up a lot, particularly in the areas where we're needing mentoring, which is not direct lecturing, but we need to give instruction to groups of students. And we can use people from our internal and external teachers so they can do it across different sites. And I think in the future, we will be doing it more internationally as well. So the multi-site thing for us has also been a real positive. We noticed that actually, in terms of functional variation, that being able to conduct education online for us has been able to give a support for some of the students with certain aspects of functional variation. So we noticed that because we could record all our lectures, they can look at them again, they can take them asynchronously. It actually helped some students who perhaps found it more difficult to participate in the classroom situation. We're expanding that now to try and see how we're going to do that in the future. But it's an interesting, for us, it's been a real learning process. There are positives and negatives of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But for us, it's been, again, a positive move because it's allowed us to support students, particularly ones who have social anxiety, in a different kind of way. So we can actually support those students directly, and they don't have they feel more comfortable in actually taking a class and being able to ask questions where they're not actually having to speak. They can add it to chat or something like that. We record materials we make, and we can reuse them in lots of different ways. Of course, there are GDPR questions about this and a number of other issues, which I think we're solving rapidly, so we can actually do this in a long-term basis. So we can actually reuse materials, but also we can teach asynchronously. So a student can watch a class. If they miss something, they can watch it afterwards. And then also, if they want to go back and look at something again, they can look at a recording and check on something and see what a teacher had said or what a mentor had given for advice. And then for us, it's been a fantastic way to synchronize with our learning management system. So all the various online activities that we're doing, all the things we're doing are linked directly to the individual classes through our learning management system, so that the student can find all the materials they need. They can look at lectures again. They can find everything in one place. And I think generally there's a culture now that they know kind of how to do this. I mean, it's very much a generational moment. Where I think they're used to actually accessing materials in a different kind of way than they would have been, say, 20 years or 40 years ago. When I first started teaching, it was probably more just classroom. And I think it's fantastic that we've got all these opportunities. So I see real positive things. I think COVID taught us a lot. We learned a lot about how we had to handle a variety of different things, not least in the functional variation, but how we have to support students who had particular forms of functional variation and how we might support them in the future. Which leads me to some of the challenges we've had. And again, that actually deals with functional variation. I mean, certain cognitive neuropsychiatric functional variation, we noticed that certain people, certain students, particularly in the areas of Asperger's and ADHD, the difficulties of trying to switch between a physical presence and an online presence became really, really challenging. And we had to put extra effort into trying to talk to those students and helping them. And I think it is something that we're still battling with. We work very closely with organizations, international organizations, to help us support some of this, but it's still something I think we have a lot of work to do to see what actually are the real implications of moving an education into a hybrid form, and how that actually works particularly for students with certain forms of cognitive or neuropsychiatric functional variation. We also noticed, which I think is, I'm sure you probably have your same stories about this, we noticed an increase in the toxicity of how people were communicating with each other. In the games world, people use Discord a great deal, just when they're playing games. We use that when we're teaching for many of our classes. And we have to monitor this much more carefully than we did before, because these forums can create a very negative, people feel more emboldened to say things that they would never say in a kind of classroom situation, and they can be quite rude, and we have to be quite careful to monitor that very carefully and have clear guidelines for both students and the teachers and mentors to know how to handle situations where people are saying inappropriate things. I think it again is a generational moment. I think it's about recognizing the different kinds of channels that we use. We are quite clear to our students that we don't consider all forms of communication as being official forms of communication, so that we're very clear that in the official channels that we use, that toxicity and any forms of discrimination, we are extremely quick to jump on and things. But I think it is a continuing challenge for us. We do notice dangers of social separation for some of the students, that they can become, particularly for certain kinds of certain activities, they do find themselves in a bubble and just they lose contact. And we have to kind of reinforce this by doing things that can help. In the games world, of course, we work very much in collaborative projects. So we might do a games project, which would include students from game art, game design, game programming, quality assurance, project management, and virtual reality students together in groups. So we teach agile methods as probably one of the first things that all the students learn. So there's a real emphasis that they have to understand how to work within a group, and how to deal with difference within a group, and how to actually respect that and actually work together. So we put a heavy emphasis on what the industry tools are and the ways in which we can create functioning group projects. But it's still a challenge for us, I think, when we're doing it hybrid. I wanted to touch a little bit upon some of the kind of approaches that we're looking at, mainly the pedagogical approaches. I'm not going to give a long lecture about pedagogy, but basically, as a vocational school, we've really been kind of connected with these fundamental forms of pedagogy that's been around for a long time, and behaviorism and constructivism and cognitivism. I think most of you are acquainted with this. It's very much the kind of bare bones of kind of vocational education, learning by doing and learning by reflection and that kind of stuff. Looking at how one utilizes from a constructivist position, how you utilize previous knowledge, or in a cognitive way that you treat the student as like as already having knowledge, and how do you access that. But the one that we are working a lot more with nowadays is connectivism, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we see this and why we think it's important. I don't know if anybody's how much people are aware of connectivist pedagogical methodologies, but they've been around, I think, for almost 10 years now. And the original jumping off point for connectivist pedagogy comes from a cognitive psychologist called George Siemens, who was operating a piece of research work in his own area, and he opened up a blog. And in the blog, he suddenly realized that he was getting more useful and ideas and ways that he could implement his research by using an online blog than he could do by doing dedicated research with either other institutions or particular experts. And he put together this list of principles of connectivism. And for us, the ones that really are appealing, of course, is this knowledge resting in diversity, recognizing that diversity is not just something that increases the number of ways to look at things, but when students learn through diversity, they are able to recognize in themselves different learning approaches towards tackling a particular complex issue. And that learning is fundamentally about connecting. It's about the ways in which you relate networks, systems of connection, which, because we're in vocational education, this is essential. I mean, they have to work with building up their networks when they study with us. I mean, the first thing they learn to do when they study with us is to get their own LinkedIn account so they can connect with the industries they're working with. And this third point, I think, is the most important one, that learning may reside in non-human appliances. And connectivist pedagogy, for me anyway, recognizes that all these different aspects of what, how one can improve learning, it's all of them are important. So whether you're learning from your fellow students, whether you're learning from a teacher in the classroom, whether you're learning from a YouTube video to explain something, whether you're looking at other kinds of presentations or connecting to other forums where things happen, this is where the future of our education anywhere lies. We always say to the students that 70% of what they're going to learn from their fellow students, not from what we tell them, which always comes a bit of a shock to some of the ones who come straight from high school. But it's absolutely the case. Because we're working in these group projects all the time, the students will probably learn as much from talking to other students, and also doing that online, doing that by referring to other materials that live out there. And this nurturing those connections is not just something that works for when you're at school, but also what is your future role in when you leave school and go on to employment. And also this ability to connect between different fields and ideas and concepts is a core skill. And of course, again, in our area, because you're working between game artists and designers and programmers, you need to be able to recognize how to approach the same problem from 3 or 4 different very technical perspectives to understand what that means and draw the connections. So you can say this mechanic in this game design works really well for a certain kind of networked programming, for example. So we do this all the time, but I think for us it's a key way to approach the skill sets. And the last one, that decision making is a learning process. I think this is again a kind of about the way in which we think about how you make decisions, working with agile systems, working with Scrum, working with methodologies that teach people how to work in a working group and how collectively you can make decisions. And that often means having respect for the right idea rather than the one that you want to actually do yourself. So it's about actually knowing that your fantastic work that you've already done is actually can't be used, and you collectively make a decision to do that, and thinking of it as a learning process, that through that you learn how to do it in the future. That's essential for the kind of practical education that we work with. And that is it from me. I think it's better to have more time to have questions if anybody does that, rather than me talk more. I'll stop sharing so that you don't have to look at my
William.
slides. Yeah.
Is there any question from your side?
We work also in training, but not gaming, so that's very good. I appreciate it very much.
I hope that some of these ideas are not things that just apply to games education. I myself have taught in many other areas. I taught philosophy for a number of years, so I see a lot of these things. I don't see them as being held within technical education. So I think of these things as being relevant across different kinds of education. I fully understand that some of these methodologies are not directly applicable in some university education or younger education, because the universities move so slowly in being able to change things. It'll take them years to kind of implement some of this stuff. We're a little bit luckier. We can make these kind of changes. Vocational education, even through the European Union vocational education guidelines, allows us to have a greater flexibility in what the content of an education might be, and also how it's taught. So we're able to make those changes without, you know, having to go through a very long process of applying to the in Sweden it's Skolverket or Högskoleverket. It's the people who work with the university educations. They have a much harder time to stay. My job is to get people into work. So I'm not, you know, I don't have I have a very clear mandate. So it's a very specific kind of form of education. But I do honestly believe that this kind of connectivist pedagogy is going to become the dominant, or not necessarily dominant, but it's going to become a useful way for everybody from all levels of education to start looking at education in the future. I think that we're already 25 years behind in this, and I think we have to move quickly, because we're working in things like the metaverse. We see the future of what this is going to be. Cross-platform, multi-point sites where information and data is being exchanged. This is going to happen, or is already happening, and all educations, all forms of society are going to have to embrace this. It's fascinating to see what's happening in Korea, for example. In Seoul, they've now created a virtual space of Seoul, the city, where all the aspects of things that happen through the municipal functions. So if you need to organize the permission for architecture, or you need to change your something within your plumbing, you no longer go to an office. You create your avatar and you meet another avatar in virtual Seoul, and you have an official document that's then given to you so you can carry on working. Now, this is already happening, right? This is not me imagining some amazing future. This will become something we will all be dealing with very, very shortly. And I think that all institutions are going to have to embrace this in one way or the other. And I hope that in this context, that what we're talking about is not something that's just about a particular kind of education or a particular area. The metaverse will change all aspects of society, and we will all have to embrace what that actually means and how it's going to impact what we're doing. So I just put a little flag up for that little moment.
Is there someone want to ask other questions?
I'm really interested in this kind of new form of teaching, because it's more or less the way that I continuously learn in last year after leaving the school. And this is a way that also professionists and continue to learn. And for sure, the online tools and so on are really useful. The only things that I'm afraid of in general, it's not your cases in special, but in general, is that the learning become too technical, and we forgot sometimes the theoretical part, that it's really important for school in general, for the learning methods and learning tools in general. But as I said, it's not your cases.
It's not really. I have to say, I'm working on a parallel project right now with Vinnova, which is the innovation part of the Swedish government, and we're connected in a number of projects to look at how research within the areas that we're working in can be tied into both the industry and also into what we're doing. And I think that the real critical issues are I think, sit right now between the European Union approach to vocational education and university education. The Bologna process has sped up a lot of the possibilities. We're now engaging with the academia. In vocational education, it's nowhere near. We haven't got anywhere near the same kind of common goals or the common possibilities of transparency and exchange that you now have with universities. It is moving forwards, but remarkably slowly. And I think part of that is to do with the enormous difference between schools, like vocational schools, in every single European country. So they have long histories, and they have ways of teaching which have been established over hundreds of years. And it's extremely difficult to kind of get them all aligned in any kind of way. So there's a school that I did work with many years ago, which is a school of Gobelin tapestry outside of Paris. They've been around since 1750. It would be insane to try and force fit them into the same kinds of ways of thinking as a school that's teaching games development in Sweden. It just doesn't make any sense. But eventually, I think we're going to move much closer to thinking that that vocational education status is going to be seen very differently in relationship to other areas. As we're in the current situation that 45% of our students have already had a university education, it puts us in this really strange no man's land, because many people regard vocational education as below the level of university. And yet we are the finishing school for the industry. We are the ones that actually connect directly to the industry. And I know this is true in other areas, not just in games. And that is a challenge to how we think about the future of what is the status of education. So I think to speak to your point about theory and practice, it seems to me that this is a much larger issue for the future in terms of thinking about what will that mean for education generally. I think we're at a tipping point.
I agree.
We really are.
I agree totally for what you said. I understand your point of view, and I agree. Yeah, it is really the next challenge for everybody. Thank you.
So if you don't have any other question, we have already our 30 minutes workshop. Do you have any other question very shortly? Otherwise, we close it now here. And I want to thank you, William, and all of you, to have participated into this workshop.